Hello, everyone. Sorry for the nervousness. This is my first time here. Thank you, everybody, for the patience. My name is Jose, and I work in the AEM security team. And the topic I want to discuss is OAuth and AEM. We have innovations while integrating with the AEM OpenAPI APIs. So, first of all, why this presentation? We have a lot of documentation about the new open APIs. We have a lot of tutorials. We have step-by-step help, how to configure every tiny detail. But I think we don't have some resource where we explain why we did what we did. I think this is very important information because it can give you a map about how to architecture your system or how things should be, what ideals we are searching for. And I try to cover this gap in this talk. So let's start. If you're going to discuss OAuth and AEM, the first step is going to briefly discuss OAuth. OAuth is a very complex topic. It's very wide. For sure, we are not going to discuss it completely in 30 minutes, right? But we can have an idea of what we are trying to achieve with OAuth, and this will be important later. So let's travel back in time. And if you remember, this was a quite common site in 2008, for example, right? You have a web application, and you need some user data. And that user data, to access it, you need the only thing that you can do is to request the user name and password, right? With this, then you can totally impersonate the user and access the user data. So yes, of course it worked, but it had problems, right? And we can see we can see such a problem here, right? We trained the users to tell them, oh, you just put your user and password in any web application and it's going to be fine. And those are the results, right? The result is malicious web applications totally taking over the user account. There was no defense. And this was one famous screenshot I was able to get. There are not many around anymore. So what is the real problem here? What are we trying to defend against? The real problem here is the failure to respect the least privilege security principle, right? So if you search in Google security principles, least privilege will always appear because it's very important. And I have this definition. Users, programs, or processes should be given only the minimal access necessary to perform their tasks. You see, this aligns with my team, more or less. We didn't prepare this. We could have prepared because we are discussing actually the same topic, just at a different level. So we need to tackle this problem. And to tackle this problem, the industry tried different solutions until they reached what seems to be the most adopted one, which is OAuth version 2.0, the RFC, by October 2012. And what is OAuth? OAuth is a delegated authorization framework. And those three words are very meaningful. First, I will start from the back. Framework. OAuth is not a protocol because it's not so well defined. It's more of a set of very strong recommendations that you follow. You are compliant with OAuth, but it's not defining a strict protocol that guarantees compatibility, right? So you can have two implementations that are fully following OAuth, but they are not compatible with each other. We can see, cases. For example, the access token. The access token can be a JWT, or the access token can be a random string. Both are valid, and OAuth does not get into those details. So, a framework. Authorization. We are dealing with authorization. It's true that when we create an access token for the user, we asked the user to log in, right? So there is some authentication involved, but the realm that we are working on is authorization. We have an access token. We are sending a request with that access token, and we are deciding if this request can access or not the resources we are trying to access. And finally, the most important word, because it's generally the most ignored one, is delegated. When we use OAuth, the user is delegating to your application, right? We are developers here, so you're writing an application. When you use OAuth, the user is delegating some privileges to your application. Your application is going to obtain an access token, and with that access token is going to do stuff in the name of the user. And finally, I want just to add a tiny bit of vocabulary because it's going to be used later. We call your application, the application that you are creating, that is integrating with AEM, we call this application the OAuth client. Why is it the OAuth client? Because this application is negotiating with the authorization server an access token, and then is using this access token to access a resource. So when you study OAuth, this piece of the OAuth machinery is the OAuth client. Okay, I add a bit more of trivia here. You can see the RFCs where we describe OAuth 2.0. Very interesting RFCs, very clear, nice. I also want to mention that this didn't appear in isolation. There is a community that works in identity and access management, and this community is pushing forward, and it continues working way more after OAuth, right? So we have things like OpenID Connect. That was standardized. This one is just is a protocol because it goes into implementation detail for logging. We get, for example, the OAuth 2.1 draft, where we consolidate best practices of OAuth 2.0, making them mandatory, and we remove deprecated stuff from OAuth 2.0. And finally, I have this link here, the OAuth.net. In this link, you can see all the RFCs that have been continuously developed, where we see the advancement of this work. Identity and access management. I want to mention specifically this one about security concerns. This is an RFC that if you are using OAuth, I mean, it's quite interesting, right? Because you can, in this RFC, people are taking into consideration which vulnerabilities can appear if you have a bad implementation of OAuth. So they give you very, very good advice if you are working with OAuth. So the takeaway from this introduction to OAuth is the following. The user will grant your application a limited set of his privileges. So we have that user. We don't want to go back to 2008. So your application will have a very small subset of the user powers. We don't want the whole power. We want only the necessary. And this is, again, I will bring also least privilege. We are respecting least privilege. So after this, we go back to the AEM world. This is the second part of the system. So what did we have until now to integrate with AEM? We have the AEM Developer Console. It's still working. And in that AEM Developer Console, you will log in, you will get your set of credentials that we are going to use to obtain an access token. We will be using the JWT flow, where we build a JWT, and then we exchange it for an access token. Later, we use that access token to access the resources. This flow only covers one use case, which is the service-to-service use case. So you have a backend that's trusted, that's protected, and this backend needs to access AEM. So in this communication, for this case, this flow works, but it doesn't work for anything else. I want to mention very clearly, the JWT flow is not deprecated in the AEM Developer Console. I mean, you have probably seen a lot of emails from the Adobe Developer Console where this flow was deprecated and is not longer available. That is true. But in the AEM Developer Console, we continue using it. There is no weakness on it. There is no vulnerability, no problem. The only problem that we have is that it's not a standard OAuth flow, and it's more complex. Right? You need to build that JWT and exchange it. It's more complex than what we do in OAuth. That's why we are dropping it, but it's totally fine. Another piece, the new OpenAPI APIs. So we have this new way of building APIs. And I don't want to mention anything else because you had a fantastic presentation from Radu 2 years ago explaining all the details. I just want to mention the new ideas that come for integration. And the new ideas that come with the OpenAPI APIs is we are going to start using Adobe Developer Console, and we are going to use OAuth standard flows. And let's see the consequences and why this is interesting. So Adobe Developer Console is the UI where we create credentials to access most of the Adobe solutions. Right? So from now on, we are going to also get AEM there. And your application may access Adobe Stock and may access the AEM instance. You can use one or more API cards in your project. So we are going to build a project, and this project is the configuration of your application or your OAuth client. Each time you add another API card, you are going to add more OAuth scopes. Those are more privileges from the user capabilities, right? So for example, if you add the sites API card, you are going to get the sites access of that user. And finally, it's very interesting, and I'm very happy of it, because Adobe Developer Console enforces best practices for OAuth. We are going to see it in many places, even on the demo. But they choose the right tools. They did a specific job narrowing down. OK. And what is most important is that it also supports new use cases. We have the old service-to-service use case that was supported in AEM Developer Console, but now we can get also user tokens. So tokens attached to my identity, to the user identity, right? Which was what we were aiming at the start when we were discussing OAuth. We want to have something that grants a small piece of the user privileges. And those are the tools for that. So let's go forward. The second part is we are going to use OAuth standardized flows. And this is great. First of all, because you don't need any specific Adobe information. You know about OAuth, you are using other systems, so you can just reuse that knowledge. Right? It's exactly the same like everybody else. And you can use standard OAuth libraries. This is a big win. Right? First, for productivity, you don't need to write that code. And second, for security reasons. Writing an OAuth implementation is a very nuanced task. It requires a lot of attention to detail. Many things can go wrong. And the general consensus of the security community and the identity and access management community is please use your available libraries that are well maintained for your language. Every language today, with some developed language, common language, will have decent OAuth libraries that you can rely on. And this is a huge win. OK. The next step. We said before that we cover new use cases. So let's go briefly and show a few diagrams. Again, each OAuth flow has a lot of details. I'm not planning to really go in depth how we set them up. It's more about how we use them. Where is this flow adequate? The first one in Adobe Developer Console is called the server-to-server OAuth. The regular name for that flow is client credentials grant flow. And we can see on the components here, we have a backend. What we said before, we have a trusted backend application. This application is going to negotiate an access token, and then it's going to access AEM with that access token. Exactly what we were doing before with the JWT flow. It's a simple system. But it's not fine-grained. It's coarse, right? You have this identity that allows full access on the other side, right? There's only one technical account, you're probably familiar with that term, that represents your backend application. There is no fine-grained access. This is where the situation improves. We have what Adobe Developer Console calls the OAuth web app. The standard OAuth name is Authorization Code Grant Flow with a confidential client. This is, when you study OAuth, this is the first thing you study, the most complex case where our user wants to access one application, and this application needs to bring data from a third party, from a third system. So the application sends the user to the authorization server. The user logs in. An authorization code gets created. Then the backend application negotiates an access token, and with that access token, it accesses the resource. So we can see we still have a backend application, but the difference right now, and this is the important thing, is we don't have only one technical account in between those systems. Now, every user that is logging in is going to create an access token, and that access token will be tied to the user. So it's way more narrowed down. So if Jose has some access to some information, the application can get only what Jose has access to. And this is a big win for security. I also want to mention we still have this trusted backend application, and we protect those credentials with a secret. So when you set up this, it's going to have a secret. And this is also very good for security. Sometimes you are using powerful tokens that you don't want to have in every browser. You want this powerful token, even though it's attached to a user, it's still powerful, right? It's some maybe delicate information, and you don't want it directly in every browser. You can get this because you have a private backend. So this is one new use case that is available to access the diva APIs. And this is probably even more common. The OAuth single page app. This is how it's called in Adobe Developer Console. In the world of OAuth is authorization code grant flow, now with a public client. The public client just means that you don't have a secret in those credentials. So you are just obtaining the token with the user credentials, let's say. I don't want to go into the details of the flow. It's the same flow as before, but you are implementing it only in the browser. And this is a world of change from the security perspective. We trust way less the browser than these protected backends, right? So when you are using this flow, you need to be aware that any browser in the world can become the machine running this application. So this content will not remain on the backend. This content will reach the user browser. Other than that, it's exactly the same. The browser will negotiate the access token exactly with the same flow, and it will use that access token to access AEM. Here we see, for example, what I was mentioning before, how Adobe Developer Console did a great job into choosing the right options. They enforced the usage of PXE, which is a stronger way to protect against CSRF, which came after. This didn't come in the original OAuth specification. And also they forbade one flow that is deprecated now, which is the implicit flow. We can see it used in some places. It's not vulnerable, continues to work, but we are now enforcing the usage of this one that is way more resilient against attacks. In this tiny demo, what I want to share with you is a small tool that we created to troubleshoot all this traffic, all this process of obtaining an access token. So before saying anything else, I put everything in a GitHub repository. Those are just simple scripts. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this demo. So I created a couple of scripts that's going to illustrate the whole process. And you can replicate everything if you just download that repository. So let's go. So let's start with the service-to-service use case. And I'm just sharing with you what this script does. This script is going to, first of all, show in the configuration of this tiny tool. We found that it's very convenient. It can be even used for automation. You create a YAML file with all the credentials, all the details for your OAuth negotiation. And then we run that tool. The name is IMS CLI. And we store the access token that we obtain from IMS in this environment variable. Later, we decode that token, and we show the information that comes inside that token. So a word of advice. We are the OAuth client. We are negotiating an access token to obtain a resource. In our code, we should never rely on this information. This is a concern of the authorization server. So you are breaking the OAuth rules if you are decoding the token, getting information from there, and doing stuff. You should not be. Yet, for troubleshooting, it's a great tool, right? You can see what is the token supposed to do. And finally, we just make a request to AEM, and we are going to see that we get 200. So let's run the script. Okay, so let's start. This is the configuration that we have, right? You see the client ID? This is your identification, the identification of your OAuth client. This is the ID of your application. This becomes important later in the best practices. We have the secret, which I'm blocking, of course. And then we have the scopes that we are requesting. This is the power from the user that we are requesting. The more scopes that you request, the more power in the name of the user your application is requesting. As we said with list principle, we should request as least as possible. And then we have the IMS organization, which is, well, a parameter that we need also. Now, we negotiate the token. We obtain that access token. And now you can see information that is inside, and it's pretty interesting. First that you see is type, access token. Every time you access a resource, you should be using an access token. And this becomes interesting if you are using OpenID Connect. Sometimes people misuse the ID token from ID Connect, OpenID Connect, and it should not be used for those purposes. Use an access token to access resources. Then you see the client ID, right? Which application requested this token? It comes inside the token, and we validate that. And you also see the user ID, the identity that is attached to that token. The identity in this case is a technical account, right? It's this account that represents your trusted backend for the server-to-server use case. And at the end, we see the scopes, the power granted to that token in the name of the user, in this case, the technical account. And finally, we make the request to AEM, and we got a 200, which is good. Everything worked, right? Perfect. Let's go for the next script. It's very, very similar. You just have an additional detail, which is a reminder that I have there as a printf. It's exactly the same process, just with a different OAuth flow. But this is taken care by the IMS CLI tool. So let's run it. OK, here. This is, yet again, Adobe Developer Console taking the right decision, which is enforcing the usage of HTTPS. Right? So if you are exchanging information over HTTP, this will be a big problem. Right? So especially when you are sending an access token that is going to be long-lived. We see here I just have a reminder because this tool that we created, it doesn't have HTTPS support integrated. So for this case, we need to use a proxy that adds HTTPS support. Maybe this is a feature to add later. But again, it's good to see how some things, secure things, are enforced. So we have this proxy. As a reminder, is running. Again, we see the configuration. There is one thing I want to mention. You can see the client ID is a different one. We're going to use a different flow. This is going to become a different OAuth client. It's a different application, so a different ID. And again, we request the same amount of scopes. And you see the difference right now. We are requesting the token, but this token is for a user. It's for me. That's why we launched the browser. I already had logged in, so that's why it went automatically. But now we obtain a token associated to my user. Now we can see it here. Right? Again, it's an access token. We see again the client ID. And we see now the user ID is not a technical account. This is a real person. And then we see some other IMS implementation details, and then the scopes. And then we send a request to the API, and we again get 200 from AEM. Okay, so this was the extent of the demo. Let's continue with the presentation. There you go. Okay, this is my explanation. You see the repository where you can download the scripts, have a look. You obtain the token, and you see also the repository for the CLI. It's open source, so happy to get any ideas there. And finally, takeaways and best practices. Takeaways from this conversation. Adobe Developer Console allows for new types of integrations. We support now new flows. We support now user tokens, not technical accounts, which is great. We take advantage of standard OAuth flows to obtain those tokens. Use libraries. They are done there, you are more productive, and you are safer. And finally, the last takeaway is that we always should limit the privileges of our application. We should not request everything that the user has. We should not think that our application has the same privilege as the user. Oh, the user can do this, and we can automatically do it. No. We should choose what our application needs and only request that. And some best practices. Of course, as we said before, always think least privilege, right? We don't want to end in 2008 again. When you create your project, use only the needed API cards, right? As less as possible. Don't add anything because maybe if you need it, you use it. If you don't, you don't. Now, the last two are more nuanced and they are more interesting. One Adobe Developer Console project for each application. So you have 7 applications accessing your AEM instance. Each one of those applications should get its own Adobe Developer Console project. Each one of those applications is an OAuth client. Is going to negotiate a different type of IMS token. Some applications need more privileges. Some of them need less. So for each one of those, add an Adobe Developer Console project. And each one of those projects, each one of those OAuth clients should be allow listed in AEM. We use the configuration pipeline for that. But you should allow list in only one AEM instance. Right? So for example, you have application number 1. And application number 1 has the developer instance. So the developer instance where you are developing, you should only allow listed in the AEM developer instance. Right? You want to have a developer environment. What do we gain with that? Let's say, for example, our security practices are lax in our developer instance. And then a token gets misplaced. What happens? Because that OAuth client of the developer application is only allowed on the AEM developer instance, if somebody steals that token is not so important. It only grants access to some stuff in the developer instance. If you use that token in the AEM production instance, it will not work. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you liked it.
Thank you, Jose. So we have a couple questions for you. First one, where can we find the mapping of what each scope possible to select on requests to?
Okay, so it is more or less on the inverse direction, right? So you want to use some APIs, you are going to use the API cards, and as long as you add those API cards to your project, you will see the scopes appear in the project. So you choose, I want to access the site's information. I use the site's API cards, and then those 4 scopes that we saw on the screen will appear there in the UI, and you just copy them to your project.
Okay, next one. How long does the token live?
That's a very open question, right? I think by default is 24 hours. I may be wrong, or I don't know by memory, but it's long-lived. Generally, access tokens are long-lived.
Okay.
Theoretically, they could be negotiated for less time if you want, right? So if you want to have a token for less time, you can also request it that way.
Okay, so there is a follow-up. What's the best practice when I need continuous access from distributed infra?
Sorry, can you please?
What is the best practice when I need continuous access from distributed infra for the token?
So best practices is, if you need the token for 1 day, you don't ask it for a week, right? So least privilege, again, least privilege. And maybe it's better to rotate your token more frequently, right? So if you have, for example, a service-to-service integration and you have the option to negotiate the token for a week or for a day, just pick a day, and every day negotiate that access token again, right? So I would say that's best practice.
Okay. And so this person has really pushed a lot of questions into one. So there's one more follow-up. Should each Lambda request its own token?
I think you say once every 10 minutes is not bashing at all. So yes, bash it once every 10 minutes. No doubts. Like, where are you going to cache that token? Like, caching the token just creates so many questions in my mind. It's like danger, danger. No caching of the token, no put it anywhere. No, just negotiate it, and then just keep it in memory. You need another one, you negotiate it. It's not a big deal. Is there any throttling? Yes. And we use your OAuth client, this ID, to say, oh, this guy is out of control, so yes, he's throttled. But you mentioned like 500. No, 500 is not a problem. In a minute, I was like, no, not at all. Like, you're good.
Okay, good. So that's it. And thanks again for your great talk. Big round of applause, please, for Jose.
Thank you, everyone.